speaking of that, Stop Killing Games just got very real. The bill changed. So I gotta see what this is about, to be honest.
Across the internet, gamers have been celebrating. Loads of people believe that Stop Killing Games just defeated the biggest games industry lobby in the US, with them of course being the ESA. It's the sort of thing where the ESA are on the side of the games industry, which means they're often not on the side of us, the games customers. But it's actually more than that, because this is seemingly the third time that the ESA have lost this bill.
Are you serious?
Does that mean that games are now saved from being deleted?
No.
Of course, not quite.
Of course.
So, despite what you may have heard, the fight is very much not over. The bill that Stop Killing Games just won at committee has actually already been changed, and the scrutiny is only going to get more intense. Today, though, I'm going to catch you up with the entire situation and the amendments that came in after the news initially broke. So, where are we and what's going on? Well, California's State Assembly is where we are, and what's going on is Assemblyman Chris Ward filed the Protect Our Games Act in February. Stop Killing Games advised in this act, and now they're backing it as an organization. Now, the bill is basically working its way towards becoming a law. Now, what would it do if it was a law? Well, it would apply to any digital game available for purchase on or after January 1st, 2027, so next year. Developers would have to give a 60-day warning before any service support ends for a game, and after that point, they would need to offer players one of three options. Those options are a version of the game that works without the developer's systems, a patch that will allow the existing game to keep working, or a full refund. Now, there's...
If only that worked. If only Destiny would have announced their ending next year. Would have been better, to be honest.
Some things that are not in scope of this law, and that is free-to-play and subscription-based games, which I guess does make some sense. But any other server-dependent game would still have to provide, quote, ordinary use of core features that are, quote, consistent with reasonable expectations of a purchaser. And of course, what those reasonable expectations are, you know, open to interpretation. So, that, what I've just read out to you, is how the bill read at committee. But I'll need you to hold that thought because, well, there's a vote that it just won. But the question is, what vote? Now, the group helping us keep this show on the road today is our sponsor, Rocket Money, and honestly, this one's painfully easy to understand.
Anyways.
And a big thanks to them for supporting the channel. Okay, here's the main thrust of the story and the major vote, but after that there are amendments that really do impact how this law would even work. So, first things first, though. On the 14th of May, the bill underwent the third committee stage in the Assembly. Now, that meant that it had already passed the privacy and consumer protection as well as the judiciary reviews. So, it obviously didn't interfere with any existing laws or breach consumer rights. That's good stuff. Now, the latest review was the Appropriations Committee, which is a very American process of government where before any money is spent, it's got to be approved for that specific purpose. And obviously, if it doesn't get approved, then, well, you know, no money. Obviously a problem. Now, the committee analyzed the bill and they worked out the fiscal impact of the bill. Now, this also includes whether the Department of Justice would have to hire staff to investigate and prosecute cases. So, I suppose much like how Charlie Kelly is a specialist in bird law, hey, if you're a gamer, you wanna do some legal stuff, you could become a game lawyer and you can fight this. But to be more serious, this stuff actually does cost money, and it's asking things like whether the trial costs would be super high. Of course, you're looking at about $1,000 an hour to operate a courtroom. Now, in both cases, they were found to be, quote, an unknown but potentially moderate amount. And that's good news for us. It basically means it's not enough for it to be a problem, and because of that, the committee passed it with amendments. So then, that seems like good news, but you may have remembered from the top of the video something about the ESA being involved and the ESA losing. Let's cover that. To get a handle on this, we reached out to Stop Killing Games, and their Deputy Director of Community and Outreach, Pavel Zhalchak, I believe that's how you pronounce his surname. Well, according to him, the ESA is basically doing what they always do. So, the ESA aka the Entertainment Software Association, is basically pulling the same moves in the US that the Video Games Europe group used in Europe. They are opposing AB 1921, which is the Protect Our Games Act, which can be shortened to the POG Act. That's a little factoid, not particularly relevant though. But what they are doing is they're using the same old tactics, right? So Pavel was responding to an ABC 10 segment on the bill's progress, where the ESA basically gave a statement after being asked for comment on it. And basically, they don't agree with the bill at all. They think that it mixes rights between ownership and licenses, which I'm sure many of you will have your own thoughts about. They cite problems for developers. They suggested in the worst case examples that the bill would hit, well, various game creators disproportionately. Now, much of this was repeated in a thing called a floor alert, which is basically just a letter to lawmakers urging a no vote. Now, because Stop Killing Games are involved with this bill, they got hold of that. They made it public, and Stop Killing Games founder Ross Scott, well, went through it line by line, and it makes for lovely reading. But this type of thing is nothing new. The ESA produced this floor alert because the bill was almost certain to pass the Appropriations Committee, so what they were doing was just laying out the groundwork for how they would oppose it in the next stage. And that's because at every stage the ESA has been a registered opponent. So in that way, Stop Killing Games' posts about how they've, quote, won against the ESA in California are correct. They've now won 3 times. They've won at each committee. Okay. And those committees are roughly 15 minutes of back and forth between legislators and, their witness each.
Of course, I'm not surprised that California is the one that's trying to fight against us. It's always the goddamn Californians. Every fucking time, dude. I swear to God, dude. That's why we can never have fun things, because of fucking California.
Time. And pretty much every point the ESA made to the media was already on the table at these hearings. But what Stop Killing Games have basically done is publicize them. Now, that of course makes a lot of sense. They're an advocacy group. Pushing this kind of thing forward and getting it into the conversation is absolutely, well, kind of what they're supposed to do. But obviously when reporting a story like this, it's important to, go look at the original thing. So, we took a look at the footage, and really what you see is a fairly good-natured conversation. The bill's proponent, Chris Ward, repeatedly talks about wanting to work through the opposition's concerns. Like, as an example, he even suggests that he's actually okay with the idea of this being something with a bit of a time limit, so that perhaps a game that's a decade old might not be subject to the law. Really, what we see in the footage is what regular legislative action looks like. It's not the most exciting thing in the universe. It's just negotiation and scrutiny of legislation that ultimately, of course, could be worth many, many, many millions of dollars. Because, of course, there's many ways this could go that could end up being quite expensive for the people involved. Now, let's take more of a forward look in this. So, what we've just seen here was the final committee of the State Assembly. Now, from here, it then passes to the floor of the Assembly, which is basically where the whole House will vote on it and where other politicians can request amendments. And once that's done, then the whole process starts again with California's Senate. So, with the Senate, there will be committees and then a full vote. If it's amended in one house but not amended in the other, then there'll be a vote on reconciling the differences. So very much the process is not over. There could be months and months of scrutiny. But the thing is, it does actually move fast, and that's why it's now time to talk about an amendment. The amendment then. So, 4 days after the committee vote, the bill was actually amended. This happened on its second reading, which is the 18th of May. And what happened is the scope language changed. And this does quite matter. So, the bill that passed appropriations applied to any digital game available for purchase. Available for purchase being the operative. On or after January 1st, 2027. Now, the amended bill has changed that a little bit, where it applies to games, quote, first available for purchase or re-released for purchase on or after that date. And that is a real narrowing of scope. The initial committee version would have captured legacy games that just happened to be on sale after the deadline, but this new amended version essentially is only capturing new releases and intentional re-releases. It would mean that the existing back catalogue stays out of the scope of this law, which, if you're a big diehard and you really, really want a maximalist interpretation of this applied, this would really be quite a loss for your cause. But if you're more thinking about pragmatic progress, which I will admit I am, I think that this is probably a good thing in getting a realistic and workable bill passed. But I know an hour of scope could be disappointing, so how about we check in with, well, what Stop Killing Games themselves is pushing for. To orient ourselves on this, we can take a look at the global efforts and specifically on the EU Citizens Initiative. So within the last year, Stop Killing Games' public position on the EU Citizens Initiative has actually been that they're not asking for any retroactive action. And here's the direct quote from them. Just to be clear, Stop Killing Games is not retroactive, even if we wanted it to be. It would apply mostly to future games if passed. So in one sense then, the May 18th Amendment moves the bill closer to that original framing. A game like, say, Anthem, already pulled from sale, was always going to escape this, and so too would any legacy game that just happens to be sitting on a digital storefront.
Wait, do you think the reason why they pulled the plug on this is because of the Stop Killing Games thing? I'd be curious if that's the reason why they decided to shut down the servers for that game.
Question now is what will count as a re-release, and I think that's where the next fight will likely be. Now remember, Stop Killing Games all kicked off whenever the crew became
a re-release of a game. I assume it's like, you're re-releasing an older game, again with like the servers and everything, but a new, I guess, like a remaster or something like that. That's my estimated guess, unless it's like there's a lot deeper, but I don't know, that's just me though.
Unplayable after its servers turned off. That scared Ubisoft, who announced an offline mode for The Crew 2 in September 2024 and then shipped it in October 2025. It basically took them a year to get the thing running. Now, if a developer has a server-connected game that is, say, hitting the market on or after January 2nd, 2027, then they, of course, don't have a year to build that functionality. They would need to be thinking about this now, even if it wasn't a constraint that existed or that they thought may have existed whenever development of their game started. Now, The Crew 2 also makes the re-release question quite concrete. Let me explain, right? It's not in scope to date. The game was first sold in 2018, and it's kind of just been maintained since. But what if Ubisoft ships a Switch port of the game in, say, 2028? Maybe a definitive edition, maybe a paid expansion that sells separately. Well, currently the bill does not define what a re-release is. And that could end up being the next question. And it's decisions like what counts as a re-release that basically allows for an out-of-scope game to rather suddenly become an in-scope game, and for that to kind of just happen overnight, which will have obvious implications for the developers. And that's because once a game is in scope, the second question kicks in. And that question is, what does ordinary use actually mean? Because as I'm sure you can imagine, that's a bit of a woolly thing. Now,
so let me see, hold on. Ordinary use means the purchaser's ability to use the core feature of a digital game consistent with the reasonable expectations of a purchaser.
For this, the only definition that would matter is, of course, the law. So, ordinary use of core features, quote, consistent with reasonable expectations of a purchaser. That's what we have to go off, and how you interpret that is basically why lawyers get paid. So if The Crew 2's offline mode is missing multiplayer and some of its user-generated content features, well, does it still meet the, quote, reasonable expectations of someone who bought the game to play it online? Right now, we don't know, but if that was to come back into scope for this law, then Ubisoft, well, they may have a case to answer and a fairly hefty penalty to pay if they can't win. Though there are, of course, the three things that the bill says a company would have to do should their game fall in scope. And, well, one of those is refunds. And Stop Killing Games are not pretending that the refund option is anything other than a worst-case scenario. I mean, we've seen it play out recently. Concord, for all of its faults, did give everyone refunds. And the only reason they couldn't give people a 60-day warning was that the game only lasted 14 days. True. So for a in-scope game that fails the, quote, reasonable expectation test, well, that refund would be the only legally available option, and my god, opening up refunds could be extremely expensive for some of these companies. Now again, this is not just about new games that get to
For Call of
design
Duty.
for compliance from the start, and it's not just AAA games. It would be every server-based game that launches or gets re-released in California from January 1st, 2027 onward. And, well, California is literally one of the world's largest economies. Stuff that goes down there truly does matter, and taken in concert with the stuff going on in the EU, you could certainly see, well, you can see the legal position here kind of moving in a direction that the likes of the ESA and the companies that they represent, well, just that they would not really be too pleased about. But of course, that's only if it passes in its current form, and we've covered a lot here. But you're probably wondering, like, what is my takeaway from this video? What is the state of things? Well, don't worry, we've got a fairly clear roadmap of what's going to be following next, so let's go do that. Given that this is all legal, there are of course many steps left in the whole legislative process. Many points basically where the bill could still be altered to address the concerns of various different stakeholders, industry bodies, etc. And Ward himself has shown that he's open to that. He's open to these amendments. I think the May 18th amendment is kind of proof that he is, right? So even if you support the principles of this bill, I think a takeaway I'd have for you is that at this stage, you really should want the bill to be scrutinized as heavily as is possible. And I say that because even if California's legislator passes this, it's obviously not the end. Future lawsuits are almost guaranteed. And what that all means is the version that survives this current process is the version that will have been scrutinized, amended, and challenged, right? So yes, you might worry that this scrutiny might mean watering down aspects of the bill. And to be clear, yeah, there will be points where this almost certainly does get watered down. But a surviving law that has actually been scrutinized, that's been tested, that you can actually rely on, that is what Stop Killing Games are fighting for in the first place. So on the one hand, we can't say that this is some big, overwhelming victory, or that the sort of maximalist position in Stop Killing Games is going to be going forward. It almost certainly won't be. But what we can see is that this is actually moving its way through the real, actual, serious legal processes that any serious bill has got to move through. It's being scrutinized, it's being amended, but ultimately, a surviving law that you can actually rely on is a hell of a lot better than the whole thing being slapped down at the early stages because it was so maximalist that it was just unrealistic. And ultimately, a real law that is useful is what Stop Killing Games are fighting for in the first place. Now, obviously, the fact that we're not popping out champagne and having a big celebration, yeah,
because
that
it's
could
not
be a bit
over
of a
yet.
bummer. But you know what? I have a legal situation that's had a concrete goddamn result that is leading to a huge big corporation being completely humiliated. It's all about Subnautica 2, and
Yeah,
if
the
you want to
Subnautica
know
2
what's
thing.
going on there and how it's probably worse for Krafton
Well,
than
at least it's more of in a positive limelight for the for this specifically. It's at least, but fucking, of course, California. What do you expect at the end of the day? Nothing ever changes. I'm glad I was able to refund Subnautica 2. I'm like, it is a positive. It is a positive that we're getting, at least something good out of it, but it's not over yet. The fight is still not over. Well, the war anyways. We might have won the battles, but the war itself is not over yet for it. That money went to a new mic, lol. Oh yeah, how's the new mic anyways? And personally, I hope this does actually like I guess because like it's not there to be a law yet, right? Because it has to pass like what one more judgment, I assume, right? For this to become a law in general, because that specifically right there is what he says. Like if this part does get passed, I haven't tested it yet. Oh, okay, I see. Like I said, I want to learn as much as possible because I'm trying to learn at least to stop killing game stuff. I'm not an expert, so I can't really say too much opinions on it, right? But I know to like some degree, I know like a little bit. That's why I'm trying to absorb as much information about this as much as possible. There are some specific topics that I'm not really too expert about, so I like to sit there and kind of like think in here and trying to process the certain the certain thing that's actually happening. This one is one of those specific things that I don't know about. So, but it's something that's related to video games that I do want to know about it because I know it's going to be affecting the entire what's going to be happening for like future online games coming forward towards what January 1st of 2027. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this is going to be later in the future. But who knows? We'll see. I don't know, man. California's not really the brightest tool in the shed at the end of the day. So, yeah, I'll probably do some more research on this too as well because I do want to take a look at this and like hear other people's opinions about, there probably are some other people who know a little bit more. So if people want to comment down in the comment sections down below, I'll read the comments and then see see about this a little bit more and then be like, okay, so I kind of like see what's happening or so. Because at the end of the day, this is happening in California and I have no idea because like California is like nowhere near my circumference. So that's about it. So this is all like American stuff. So hopefully, all I can say is that hopefully it gets like completely like finally finalized and everything. But we'll see. Anyways, that's the end of the video. And like I said, if you want to see the original video, I expect watch the original video and then look into it and then let me know about it. Like I said, the more people that can inform me a little bit more, the better, in my personal opinion, so I can have a little bit more of an understanding